From India, and morning, evening to everybody from outside of India. I would like to welcome everybody, especially here in the auditorium. I can see my colleagues, faculties, Dr. Kulkarni is also there, and also all the researchers here. I mentioned there are around 45 master and PhD students who are doing their aerosol training at the Divecha Center. They are here too, as well as many colleagues, friends from the Divecha Center and IISc. Before I would let you speak and deliver the talk, Kate, I would like to welcome Raj Kishore. He's a retired Indian Forest Service officer who's been serving the government of India for a very long time, and he's also associate director at Future Earth. So, Rajji, can you please come and introduce our speaker? All the students want to know a lot about you as well. Please.
Thank you, Smriti. Thank you very much. Um, Actually, we are fortunate to have an acclaimed, internationally acclaimed ecological economist with with us, and Professor Kate Raworth is going to be our speaker this afternoon. She is an ecological economist and creator of the Doughnut, a concept that aims to meet the needs of all people within the means of the existing our planet, living planet. And she is also a co-founder of Doughnut Economics Lab. Her internationally acclaimed book, best-selling book, and probably most of us know that, either have gone through or it's really interesting. I will recommend that one should go through. Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, has been translated into more than 20 languages. You can understand the efficacy of that book, and has widely influential with diverse audience from United Nations General Assembly, Pope Francis to Extinction Rebellion. Professor Kate is a senior teaching fellow at Oxford University. It's Environmental Change Institute, and also professor of practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Over the past 30 years, Professor Kate's career has taken her from working with micro entrepreneurs in the village of Zanzibar to co-authoring the Human Development Report for UNDP in New York, followed by a decade as senior researcher at Oxfam. She holds a first-class BA in politics and philosophy, politics, philosophy, and economics, and MSc in economics for development, both from Oxford University, and has honorary doctorate from University of York, University College Dublin, KU Leuven, and Business School Lausanne. So it's my really great pleasure to have such a acclaimed speaker. I request Smriti to initiate this thing again. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Raji. Thank you, Kate, for listening to that also again. And just wanted to do a little run. So we're going to have Kate talk to us for 45 minutes. After that, we would love to have questions from the audience and also questions online. So with that, I think, Kate, please, you could start your presentation.
Thank you so much. It is a huge pleasure and honor to be joining you all today for this lecture. I'm really, really delighted, and thank you for such a generous introduction. It's lovely to be able to see you all in the room as well. So I'm sitting in the city of Oxford where I live, where I studied many years ago. And what I'm going to share is, in good part, a personal journey. So a personal journey is always specific to a person and a culture and a time and a place. So I'm a white British woman sitting here in Oxford in the United Kingdom. And I think that's an important part of the work that I'm doing, because I'm essentially challenging the very Western economic mindset that I was raised upon I was taught, and that I believe has been exported all over the world. I believe it's not fit for our times. So my passion is the rewriting of economics to make it fit for our times. And I'm 54 years old. So I was at university. I went to university here in Oxford in 1990, and I studied economics. But I believe that the concepts that I was taught are out of date. And what worries me is that they are still very much taught all around the world. So I'm going to start with what I believe is the out of date economics, and then explain from there why I wrote a book called Doughnut Economics, and give you some examples of it being put into practice. So let me share my screen. Here we go. Right. So here's what I call 20th century economics. And if you've never studied any economics, don't worry, because it has already studied you. Economics influences all of us because we participate in society and we hear our politicians speaking in parliament. We read the news in the newspaper and how we're told about how the economy is doing. And so we are all immersed in the language and the framing of economics. And I'm going to just show you in one slide what I think are some of the very core concepts of what I'm calling 20th century economics, outdated economics. So the first image, and I ask students around the world who ever studied economics, what is the first image you remember being taught? And it is supply and demand. This puts the market at the center of our vision. Welcome to economics. It means the art of household management in ancient Greek. We immediately focus on the market, which is a very particular act. There's no reason why you should immediately start by talking about the market. And by focusing on the market, the metric that we become focused on is price. So suddenly prices and financial value are at the heart of our economic conversations, and they are the metrics we live by. This then gets put into what's known as the circular flow diagram that looks at the relations between households and businesses. As you can see, households provide their labor or their capital. In return, they get wages and profit, and they can use that money as consumer spending to buy goods and services. The resources go round and round, the money goes round and round. There's lots of problems with this diagram. But this is the core starting point of modeling in economics. The selfie, the portrait of humanity at the heart of this thinking, is a character called Rational Economic Man. And he was never given an actual portrait, but I think pictures are incredibly powerful. So I drew him. The characteristics ascribed to humanity in mainstream economic theory would be of a man with no dependents, no children to raise, no parents to care for. He stands alone without anybody else's influence. He's got money in his hand, interacting with the world through the market. He's got ego in his heart. He's got a calculator in his head and nature at his feet. He hates work. He loves luxury. He knows the price of everything, and he can never get enough. These are the actual assumptions about humanity that get written into the equations of economics. But if we think we're going to thrive as 8 billion people together on this planet, I think we have no chance of doing so if we continue to tell ourselves that this is who we are, because the models we make of ourselves remake us, and we start to mimic them or expect others to behave like that, and we bring out the narrowest version of humanity's potential rather than the broadest. And then thirdly here, let me add the goal. What is the goal of the economy? As a student, I was never taught to discuss the goal. It wasn't a topic, but the goal is imprinted in every politician's speech and every economist's advice, and it is growth, endlessly, measured in GDP, gross domestic product, or national income. And no matter how rich a nation already is, its politicians and economists will tell us that the solutions to its problems lies in yet more growth. I can tell you this with certainty because living in the UK, where we had an election last July, both major parties, their slogan was growth, growth, growth. We are told that this is a priority. I know I live in one of the richest, financially richest countries in the world, in the history of humanity. And yet even this country and all countries like it have governments that say the solution to our problems is more growth. And there has to ultimately be something insane about this. I want to look briefly, since we're talking here particularly about climate change and environmental issues, how environmental issues show up in this. And this is a neoclassical economic framework that I've introduced. I cared a great deal about the environment when I was a student, and I was always waiting for the moment when it would really come clearly into the economic theory I was taught, but it's marginalized, it's peripheral. So if I take us to the macroeconomic diagram that I introduced already, well, the environment shows up as land, and it's treated as one of many types of capital. So you could think of natural capital. There it is. It's one of the inputs within the model. When we look at microeconomics, going back to that supply and demand curve, these are two curves. One is the private cost to an individual of buying something, and one is the social cost. Let's say you buy a car. The social cost is higher because you're spewing out pollution in the faces of pedestrians and cyclists. So the social cost of that car ownership is higher. And the way that the environmental impact of that pollution is represented is by drawing this little red wedge. Any environmental issues are called environmental externalities. They're external to the market contract. So if you want to talk about climate change or ecological breakdown or ocean acidification or the hole in the ozone layer or profound smog, it's an environmental externality. For me, this language and these images are an alarm signal enough that we do not have a chance of treating the environment with the centrality and the foundational nature that it has in life. We're not going to do it justice in these models. They are not adequate to the reality of our times. The living world is not an externality to anything. And the environment is not just another form of capital. I sometimes, and this is slightly joking, but not really only joking, I sometimes think that if aliens wanted to take out humanity, they don't need to land on Earth with laser guns. They would merely need to persuade us that the best way to represent Earth, our home, in our economic models is like this. And the rest of the work we would do ourselves. Because I think with economic frameworks like this, we will not protect life. The 21st century has begun in ways that tell us that when we neglect the systemic ways in which we're interconnected, when we neglect the centrality of life, it will come back and hit us. It began with a financial meltdown, with climate breakdown, with COVID lockdown. And these crises have been reported differently in the news, but they are all profoundly interconnected. They show us how connected we are to each other and to the rest of the living world. These crises hit people and nations with vast differences of gender and race and wealth and power, from the majority world to the West. And they show us that if we ignore an issue in our models, it doesn't go away. It will just come back as a crisis. And so I think these prompt us to think again. Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen, two Nobel Prize-winning economists, were asked to come up with new metrics to replace GDP. They didn't manage, but one thing they said very clearly is that those attempting to guide the economy and our societies are like pilots trying to steer without a reliable compass. I believe we need economic theory and a particular compass of where we want to get to that's actually fit for our times. It's actually designed in our times, because the theories of last century were designed in a completely different era by essentially old, wealthy white men who could not see all of the interests in the world, and so designed economic theory from their perspective. We live in a very different world, and we can bring many more interests to bear. And so that's what I set out to do in Doughnut Economics. It was my attempt to bring together insights of economics that I was never taught, from ecological economics, from feminist economics, from complexity economics, from development studies, from institutional economics. And I'm going to just give you a little flavor of some of these ideas today, and then how we've been putting them into practice in Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So let's start again. Let's start not with supply and demand. Let's start with Amartya Sen, one of the biggest influences on me when I studied development economics. As Professor Sen says, human development is concerned with advancing the richness of human life rather than the richness of the economy in which human beings live. And Sen, as I'm sure you are very well aware of his work, he's famed for centering human capabilities and the freedoms of every individual. What does every person need in life to have the freedom to contribute to society with dignity and opportunity? But I want to add to this the insight of Earth system scientists from Professor Catherine Richardson. She says, humanity can affect the functioning of its life support systems. There are tipping points we are pushing on. How does this change our definition of progress? So what happens if we try and put these two values and insights together? And this is what led me to draw what's known as the donut diagram. And you can see why it's called the donut diagram, because it's in the shape of a donut. Or, of course, many cultures have their own. I think in India, you might call it Doughnut Economics. The donut is a compass for those pilots who have no compass. It's one possible way of imagining what a thriving 21st century would look like. It aims to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. So if you imagine humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the center of that picture, then the hole in the middle is a place where people are falling short on life's essentials. This is where people do not have the resources every person has a claim to for food, water, health, education, housing, income, transport, communication, political voice, social justice. And these 12 social dimensions, I crowdsourced them from the Sustainable Development Goals. So all the governments in the world have already agreed that every person in the world has a right to live above this foundation. Leave no one in the hole. But as we seek to meet those essential needs, we risk not only getting over the social foundation, but hitting up against that ecological ceiling and exceeding it. And so the ecological ceiling is created out of the 9 planetary boundaries, those critical life support systems that Catherine Richardson was talking about. And you can see quite clearly that at the top and center, climate change is one of them, ensuring a stable climate. But it's just one of the 9. And one of the motivations for the scientists creating this framework of planetary boundaries was that they said, as we seek to tackle climate change, we must make sure that we don't tackle it without having regard to all of the other interdependent Earth systems on which life depends. They impact on one another. And so we need to take care of all 9 at the same time. From ocean acidification, chemical pollution, air pollution, ozone layer depletion, the loss of biodiversity, the conversion of land from its natural state, withdrawing fresh water, the use of fertilizer. These are the 9 pressures beyond which we should not go. So the ecological ceiling acts as a safety zone. It says, stop. If you want to remain in a safe zone, we believe you need to stop at this point. So we want no one left in the hole, but don't overshoot the limits. It's about thriving in that space in between. And already this has changed the shape of progress. It is not endless growth measured in money. It is thriving between social and ecological foundations. It's actually measuring health of life in her own terms, in social terms and ecological terms. So it's a very different starting point. When I first drew this diagram in 2012, I was really stunned by the response to it. Many people in my world and in my community were very motivated by it and started using it. And I became fascinated by the power of image and drawings and pictures. And so I asked myself, how have other cultures always depicted health, stability, thriving, well-being? And when I looked across cultures, I was absolutely astounded that this sense of a dynamic circle arises again and again and again and again, from the Taoist yin yang, the Indian Dharma circle, the wheel, the Maori takarangi, the Zen koan, the Celtic triple spiral, the medicine wheel of Turtle Island of America, again and again. And then when we put in contrast to this, the Western depiction in economics of success, this ever-growing line, it becomes an extremely, almost absurd outlier. So I now think of the donut as having the possibility of being a bridge back between these worlds. Can those of us like myself, who have been taught in a very growth-centric Western mindset, can we find our way back towards a wisdom that has long been held in indigenous cultures, in traditions of thousands of years? can we move back towards the wisdom that has always been there? If this thriving in dynamic balance is the goal in the shape of progress, we are very far from that right now. As all of the red in this image shows, billions of people are falling short on life's essentials. That's all the red in the center, while we are overshooting actually 6 or 7 of these 9 planetary boundaries. So if you look on food, the red wedge on food goes 11% of the way to the center of the circle, because 11% of people worldwide are undernourished every day. We want to eliminate that shortfall. Some of those social metrics are measured with 1 indicator, some with 2. That's why you see different levels. And we are over multiple planetary boundaries. The ceiling on climate change is measured here at 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide. As we well know, we're well over 400 parts per million, so we're in overshoot. So we need to come back into this from both sides at the same time. And for me, realizing that's the direction of change, it's important to recognize that last century's economic theories weren't written with this in mind. Last century's theorists didn't see this. They didn't think about things like this. Why would we expect their theories to solve this problem? They weren't designed for this. Last century's government policies weren't designed to turn this around. Last century's international relations weren't designed for this. Last century's business models or last century's aspirations of lifestyles, none of them were designed in light of this. How does everything change when we realize this is where we are and this is how we need to start? And we can layer on it the headlines that we see in the news reports every day, that we see that we are putting excessive pressure on the planet, and this impacts on people's lives daily. I find of all these headlines that the richest 1% own half the world's wealth. This is the one that I find almost hardest to get my head around. It's so an extraordinarily unequal world. So this is ecological degradation and extreme in social inequity in the world. I'm showing you a global picture. But of course, there are massive differences between nations for their role in causing this situation and how they're impacted by it. So let's bring it down to the national level. My colleague Andrew Fanning and other researchers created 150 national donuts at this website here, Good Life Leads Act UK. And I really encourage you if you want to look more into these. So here are just 4 nations: Malawi, India, China, the United States, accompanied by their average income per capita. So you can see from one end, Malawi, massive human shortfall, not overshooting their share of any planetary boundaries. India, significant shortfall and some overshoot. China, double whammy as well, the shortfall and overshoot. And the United States, even the United States, has very high levels of inequality in the country. That's why you can see the red in the middle, but massive ecological overshoot. So all these nations need to be on a transformative journey of their own, from their own starting point, if they were to aim to meet the needs of their people within the means of the living planet. Let me put this in a scatter plot now. The sweet spot, the place where every nation would be living in the donut, is that top left-hand corner. That is where nations rise up to meet the needs of their people. So as they meet their people's needs, they rise up and the red on the inside disappears, but they do so coming back within planetary boundaries. So the first thing you can see here is that there's not one country that's living in the donut. Costa Rica is closer than any other. For me, this, and anytime I speak to audiences from the West, from Europe, from the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Japan, I will often say, let's just remember and catch yourself if you ever find yourself talking about developed countries. There is no developed country here. There's nothing developed about overshooting planetary boundaries. There's nothing advanced. My children are 16-year-olds. They, in their geography class at school, they're taught to talk about advanced nations. And then they're even challenging their own geography teachers, saying there's nothing advanced about these countries that are overshooting planetary boundaries like mine. We are undermining the life support system of the planet and undermining conditions for all others to achieve their own realization. Let's also recognize that although these countries appear like separate scatter plots on the page, they're profoundly interconnected. Oh, there's the 4 countries I showed you, right? Going from the US and to Malawi, China, and India. But these countries are profoundly interconnected from histories of colonialism. And I say this with full awareness as a British woman talking to friends and colleagues in India. Our histories are profoundly interconnected. From military and corporate power today, trade and finance rules, resource extraction, the impacts of climate and ecological breakdown, from the present to the future. So we need transformation within and between nations. The pursuit of GDP growth tends to take countries in this direction, first towards, but then past that sweet spot. And we can see it in the trajectory of countries. In fact, my colleague Andrew Fanning plotted the actual tails. These are the empirical tails from 1992 to 2005 of these nations. So we can see nations just trending past that sweet spot. The world is going past the place it needs to be. What if we could turn this story around? And for me, the 21st century direction that we need to be pursuing is in this direction, for low-income nations to rise up to meet their people's needs without overshooting planetary boundaries in the way that all before them have done. That's unprecedented. Middle-income nations like Turkey, Russia, China, Mexico, Iran, to reorient to meet their people's needs and already come back within those planetary boundaries. That's unprecedented. And then high-income nations like mine, like all of Europe, like the US, Canada, Australia, to massively reduce their overshoot of planetary boundaries while finally meeting the needs of all of their people, because they certainly have the resources to do so. This too is an unprecedented journey. And it's going to call for a major rebalancing between nations, obviously, a rebalancing. What does that rebalancing consist in? That is up for deep discussion. Is it about reparations for return of stolen land? Is it the redistribution of wealth or redistribution of technology, renegotiating trade and finance rules, rebalancing global institutional power? This image that we're looking at now, for me, has become my map of the 21st century. And as I listen to local to global policies and events, I ask myself, are these taking us towards that space or keeping us away from it or taking us even further away? So what would it mean if we wanted economics to be in support of this? What kind of economic theory would give us even half a chance of starting to move in this direction? Think of the students of economics, from high schoolers to university students today in all of these nations. What kind of economic thinking would you want them to be learning to equip them to be the kind of economists that the 21st century needs? For me, it's definitely not the economics of the past that I showed. I think it has actually played a large part in taking us away from this place. So for me, 21st century economics starts with the goal of the donut. Here's where we want to get to. Let's be clear what the future of success looks like. What about a map of the economy? And I call this the embedded economy map. This diagram replaces starting with that circular flow diagram. It starts by recognizing that the economy is a subset of society. It is a social construct. How we provision for our needs and wants is something that has been invented by humans, and it can be refined and reinvented. It's shaped by culture, by laws, by media, by norms. And human society is embedded in and part of the rest of the living world. We are embedded in the web of life and utterly dependent upon it. We draw in material and matter. We put out waste and pollution. We are bathed in a river of solar energy. So placing the economy in the living world is the fundamental move of ecological economics. It doesn't say this is an externality. It says, no, the economy is a subset of the rest of the living world. And one of the founding fathers of ecological economics was Herman Daly, who sadly died a couple of years ago. But he made this very clear. The economy is a subset of the living world. And therefore, he set out 3 rules for setting economic scale. How big could the through flow of our economies be? He said, number 1, we should use renewable resources no faster than they can be regenerated by nature. We should use non-renewable resources no faster than they can be substituted for. And we should create waste no faster than it can be assimilated by nature. So this places the capacity of the living world as a fundamental starting point, constraint, and basis for economic activity. And of course, it changes everything that follows. So that's the ecological economics. But look inside the economy. Mainstream economics starts with the market and sometimes talks about the state. Here, I think it's really important. Herman Daly. There is something fundamentally wrong in treating the earth as if it were a business in liquidation. Yes, indeed. Let us not treat the living world as if it were a business in liquidation. Let us invest and protect its fundamentals of life. So within the economy, We've got the household, we've got the market and the state. And mainstream economics starts with the market, supply and demand, and then says, well, markets will sometimes fail. And so we look at the state. In my education, we focused on the market-state relationship. It was like an intellectual boxing match between the two. And in the process of focusing on that battle between free market, laissez-faire capitalism versus state-loving socialism, we completely lost sight of two other fundamental ways in which people provision for their needs and wants. The household, where we begin every day in the unpaid caring work of raising a family, looking after ourselves, but also the commons, where people come together and collaborate and co-create goods and services they value, sometimes with no money at all changing hands. So we've got the market, and thinking about our different relations. In market spaces, we might be a consumer or producer. You could be labor or capital. Are you earning the wage or earning the profit? In very important distinction. In relation to the state, are you a public servant or a resident, a voter, protester? These are all critical roles we can play in relation to the state. In the household, are you parent, partner, relative, child? Providing care for those who you live with. And in the commons, a volunteer, sharer, co-creator, and steward. We often move seamlessly through these many roles without naming them. But I think it's very important to name them because this is the breadth of our personal engagement in the economy. And we bring different values and different expectations to these different spaces. They are governed by different norms and rules and laws. I think they were made very visible, more than usual, by the COVID crisis. When COVID forced the market space, the physical market space, to be shut down due to the need for social distancing, it meant a lot more effort and onus went on to public services. And certainly in the UK, people started asking very quickly, whose work is essential work and why are they often so poorly paid? The very people who cannot stop working during a crisis are often the lowest paid in society. Why is that? This became a big social question. Many people were aware of the stress of caring for our sick at home. Some people found joy in being at home. Others found it profoundly stressful. It can be a place of domestic violence. Some people were caring for their children and trying to homeschool at the same time as attending a job online. Double stress. So we really felt the pressures of caring through the household, but also the volunteer economy. The commons kicks in, whether it's through a food bank, a community food bank offering food to those who are unfed, a WhatsApp group on your own street. Are you okay? Looking after your neighbors. And many people after COVID said the one thing they didn't want to lose as they came out of the pandemic was that bigger sense of a we, which many places, certainly in Europe, have lost. The biggest sense of a we, what connects us through care, through neighborliness, through society. Can we create economies that actually do have this bigger sense of a we? So that's a map of the economy, recognizing it's embedded and with many roles. Now let me come back to the donut itself. We can see from this diagram that this is showing us a world of profound ecological degradation. This is a planet that is being run down, that is on its knees. And it's a world of extreme social inequality. So if we're going to get into the donut, we have to transform the dynamics that have taken us here. We need to create economies that are distributive by design and regenerative by design. And for me, these fundamental dynamics replace the focus governments tend to place on growth itself as a goal. The deeper goal is to be regenerative and distributive in order to move into this donut-shaped space. Let me explain both of these. We have inherited in many countries in the world, especially since the 1950s, since the mass use of fossil fuels and the mass use of plastics, we've inherited degenerative economic systems and industries that take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while and throw it away. And we know this pushes us over planetary boundaries. We need to move to regenerative, or indeed return to regenerative economies that our parents and grandparents may say, this is exactly how we always lived. We reused, we recycled, we refurbished, we repaired, we returned materials to their organic base of life. So can we work again with and within the living cycles of the living world? Some examples from around the world, from eco-construction to circular construction to renovation and retrofit. So 3 examples of regenerative approaches to buildings, but also recognizing that urban settlements are embedded in natural systems, so allowing nature's flooding to be absorbed rather than to cause flooding in the city streets. So, and I'm just bringing some examples from urban design, but of course you could use examples of regenerative design from many, many different fields and sectors. So becoming regenerative by design, but also recognizing that we've inherited in many countries economic systems that have become divisive. They capture opportunity and value in the hands of a few. And this is often through regulation, through inheritance, through infrastructure. They tend to drive returns to those who already have wealth, the owners of capital. Can we create distributive economies that share value and opportunity far more equally? Because there's no way that such a currently unequal world or nation as yours or as mine, there's no way we can get into the donut with such levels of inequality. And so again, from distributive urban design, here are a few examples. I'll just give this example from Chile of half houses. The architect Alejandro Aravena realized that many people would never be able to afford to buy a house, but they might be able to afford half a house. So he designed and built half houses. They have all the plumbing, electricity, all the piping that you need. And then people buy that half of the house and then save up over time. And when they have enough money, they can fill in the rest of the house themselves. So just changing literally the architectural design of the housing opened up the ownership of a house to many, many more people who would otherwise have always been stuck renting. We've got examples here of community-led redevelopment of a former so-called slum in Bangkok, that the community who had been there themselves designed the housing, the community spaces that they wanted this to become with some support from the city. Transport, such as these dedicated bus lanes in Curitiba, Brazil, that mean workers who are busing in for an hour and a half every day actually have affordable, accessible, high-speed transit that makes life work. And then installing solar power here in the US, who's going to get those jobs and those new skills? And in Cleveland, in Ohio, they actively reached out to communities, the Black population who had traditionally been marginalized from having skills like these, and put them at the center so that they become part of the high skill new economy. So let me pull back. I've given you a really quick overview of some of the concepts from 20th century economics, which I believe do not serve us, to 21st century economics. These can be the beginnings of new economic thinking that will actually help us to create a world that thrives. So those are some of the 7 ways. And when my book came out in 2017, many people got in touch and said, I want to put these into practice. I'm using this in my company, in my local government, in my town. We're using it in our community. I want to reflect on my own life. So I co-founded Doughnut Economics Action Lab to work with these pioneers to see how people are putting it into practice and what can we learn when we learn together. So I'm going to give you one example, and it's going to be from the realm of localizing the donut to a place, particularly practiced by local city governments. So many people said, what would it mean for our city to live in the donut? I mean, how could we do that just here? What would that mean? And so we created a framework which starts by unrolling the donut to make space between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. And we ask this tiny question, which of course is not a tiny question, it's a huge question. I invite you to think of it about a city that you know and love. How can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? You can hear that's a complex question. There's a lot going on. And so we divided up into what we call the 4 lenses of doing a donut portrait of a place. 2 are local aspirations, social and ecological, and 2 are about our global connections, because we know that everywhere is connected to and therefore impacting on the rest of the world. So I'm just going to run through these one at a time. Let's start here. How can everyone in our city thrive? This is the local social lens. What would it mean for everybody here to have that basic minimum of a social foundation? And what is that basic social minimum? That is a conversation for the people of this place to define what are the indicators, what are the metrics, what are the standards that we believe everybody here should have a claim to, and who is falling short on that? And therefore, how do we prioritize that in policy making? Let me add to this a local ecological story. How can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? We recognize that every settlement, whether it's a town or city, it's nestled somewhere in nature. And in that location, nature has spent billions of years figuring out how to make life thrive, whether it's at the top of a plateau or in a valley, in the tropics or in the temperate region. Nature has figured out how to store carbon, how to welcome wildlife, how to cycle the water, how to harvest the sun's energy. She even figures out how to make us feel at home there. What would it mean to create cities or settlements or agriculture or towns or districts that actually aim to be as generous as nature? Create buildings that sequester carbon rather than release it. Create cities that store groundwater after a flood rather than are exposed to flash flooding. To create cities that are cool on a hot day rather than exacerbate an urban heat island effect. So how can we design with the aim of being as generous as nature already is? And of course, this is key to resilience in the face of climate change. We know that places that are nestled in nature are going to have cooler, right, less extremes of temperature, more ability to absorb extremes. So how can we work with nature to actually protect ourselves from the impacts of climate change that have already been locked in? So these two are the local aspirations, social and ecological, but it's only half the story. We have to recognize that every place is connected to the rest of the world and has impacts on people worldwide, particularly through global supply chains. So how can our city respect the health of the whole planet? The products that are purchased in any place are often sourced not just from beyond the city, from the whole nation, from the region, maybe from the world, and therefore having impacts, ecological impacts of extraction and often pollution and degradation worldwide. How can we come back and live within our share of these planetary boundaries? So this is the lens of the 9 planetary boundaries. And then thinking still of our connections worldwide, actions and decisions taken here have implications for people worldwide, whether it's through global supply chains, through lifestyle choices, through the cultural connections created by universities and institutions that actually create solidarity through international connection, through their welcome or not of migrants, through the policy regimes that our governments negotiate on behalf of our countries, have impacts on people everywhere. So this brings them together, the local aspirations and the global connections, the social angles and the ecological. We invite any place that wants to do a donut portrait to look at itself through these 4 lenses. For most places, this is very new. Most places only look at themselves through the local social lens and then ask about their climate impacts. So it's a big expansion of the range of what matters and what we're responsible for. But it means that everything is visible. And the complexity wouldn't go away if we ignored it. It would just come back and hit us if we just left it out. We can also use this as a canvas, removing those images, making this a space for thinking. So reimagining a city's future of food. Use this as a canvas. How is food in this city related to people thriving, related to the ecological health of this place, related to our impact on the whole planet, and how we relate to people worldwide, or water, or health, or housing? Taking any one of these topics, putting it at the center, and then asking, what's already working well here? Where could we really improve? What are the massive inspirations we could learn from elsewhere? And how is everything interconnected? So we've seen more and more places start to use this 4-lens framework to deeply think about their futures. There are over 90 city level and local, district, town, rural governments around the world that have been engaging with these tools in the past year, and more than 50 of them are using it as a public tool, public facing tool, saying this is our vision for our place. And they've really adapted it to their own locality. So just in these last few minutes, I want to share some examples with you from around the world. The first city to do this was Amsterdam in the Netherlands. They created their own orange donut, as you can see, and they set a vision for Amsterdam to be a thriving, inclusive, regenerative city for all residents while respecting the planetary boundaries. I would love to live in a place that officially committed to that vision. They had an ambition to create a circular economy in the city, 100% circular by 2050, even though we don't yet know what that means. 50% circular by 2030, 10% circular by 2022. And they started in social housing projects, in denim and textiles, which is a big industry in the city, and food. And then at the same time, a community group began called the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition, and they started documenting all of the community-led projects that already existed in the city and that actually were already in service to bringing the city into the donut by celebrating everything that already is here. The city of Barcelona in Spain was one of the first to follow. As you can see, they've really unrolled the donut. They've gathered all the data and they've re-rolled it. And they said, this is the state of our city. So we can now use this to monitor our progress over time. Are we moving into the donut from all four sides? The image you can see full of trees, this used to be actually gridlock with cars. And they removed the cars and they brought in trees. They built parks and public spaces and created commons right in the middle of the cities. Cars can still pass through, but they are treated as a visitor that must go very slowly rather than the dominant mode around which everybody else must walk. Thimphu in Bhutan, the government of Bhutan got in touch with us and said, we have our concept of gross national happiness. From everything that we've seen coming out of Western founded economics, the donut makes the most sense to us. We want to combine the two in reimagining the future of the capital city here, of reimagining the valley of Thimphu and Paro. And so they've imagined the region in the year 2047. This is a regenerative and distributive future, adapting these tools to their own local realities and combining it with their own framework. In Ipoh in Malaysia, they are aiming to be Asia's first city that's set its goal for living in the donut. So again, they've created their own version of the donut and launched their own initiatives in the city, bringing it into schools, teaching it there, asking how can we harness Ipoh's incredible natural beauty and traditional culture to become a regenerative, distributive place rather than be caught in the goal of endlessly growing for its own sake. We've recently released a report called Cities and Regions, Let's Get Started, which is full of many examples of the different ways in which these and other places are getting started, if you're interested. But I also want to share that it's not just local governments that are doing this work. Community-based organizations have sprung up around the world saying, we want to work with these ideas. We want to call for our local government here to start using it. And I'm going to give you just two examples. In Australia, Regen Melbourne created their own donut, amazing coalition of people from across many, many different institutional backgrounds, coming up with a vision. And what motivated them was the terrible, devastating wildfires that the city of Melbourne faced in 2022. Much of their surrounding land was burnt to ash because of climate change. And it really was a moment for people there to say, the path we're on, the future we're heading for does not work. We need a new compass. And so they adopted the donut and began setting out a new vision, literally out of the ashes of a great destruction in their city. Their goal is for the river that passes through the center of the city to be swimmable. So the image you can see, that's not current. People don't currently swim in the river. That is a vision of the city they want to create and bringing nature back into the streets of the city. But the other one I want to show you is the Mumbai Doughnut Collab, which is bringing people together to make Mumbai more livable and sustainable. And they've just been having a month, actually, of activities, sharing the concept. As you can see, they've made their own version, again, of the donut, adapting it and bringing out the most locally relevant issues and inviting people into conversation, saying, how can we make this real in Mumbai? So if Mumbai is a city that's dear to your heart, I deeply invite you to connect with them because they're doing some really wonderful work and really getting started. Let me finish here by saying and appealing to students. Many students, I mean, when I was a student studying economics, I was deeply frustrated, but there was no internet. I couldn't connect with other students around the world. Today's economics students have connected, and there's an incredible international movement called Rethinking Economics, bringing together economics students from around the world who are deeply frustrated by the outdated frameworks they're being taught, calling for frameworks like Doughnut Economics and many others to be what's taught in the curriculum instead. And there's a chapter in India. So anyone's interested, I encourage you to look up Rethinking Economics India. They recently, or 2 years ago, they did their own study of whether or not there was pluralism, multiple perspectives being taught in India's economics education. So I strongly recommend them as a wonderful place to connect if you care about rewriting economics. And the last thing I want to share is that of these 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist, I ran a course here in the city of Oxford, one of these 7 ways each week. And in the process, I developed slide decks and resources, which I have now made public. So on our platform at doughnut-economics.org/university-courses, there are many slide decks. I've shared with you ideas from maybe 2 of these slide decks today, but many, many slide decks and reading resources and videos and activities for anybody who is teaching or any student who would like to teach themselves. I warmly invite you to look at these resources. They are free online in the Commons for anyone to take and share so that these ideas can spread and scale at the speed that our times demand. And here is our platform, doughnut-economics.org. You are welcome to browse. You are welcome to join. We would love you to join. If you look under the community, you can see who else from India, who else from your region is there. What are they doing? Do they want to get together? Can we learn together? What can we make happen? All the tools on our platform are in the Commons. They are free and accessible to use. We ask only for reciprocity. If you use them, please share back what you learned or how you adapted them, because we know that one of the greatest sources of making change in the world is peer-to-peer inspiration, and this is where it comes from. Let me stop here, and I'm really looking forward to this becoming conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. I was just toggling between the cameras. I don't know if you heard, but there was an upload from the auditorium. There were lots of clap of hands, and I would like the online audience also to raise your virtual hand if you have questions, and also here at the auditorium, we will open the auditorium for questions, comments. Any of your comments? You would want to share anything? You could come up here. I think it's fine. You can come up here. Yeah. Just come up here. Introduce yourself and ask
Good
the
evening,
question.
ma'am. It's Prakriti from IT Roorkee. I would like to ask that you showed the donut diagram where 3 countries have, I mean, more than the planetary boundaries more. I mean, they were overshooting the planetary boundary. So if they start try to reduce that, so how many years it would take to come inside that donut?
It's
And
a
what
great
measures
question.
can we take to reduce that?
What measures can we take to reduce the time?
No, the overshooting of the
The
planetary
overshoot.
boundary.
So
Yeah.
are you talking about the global donut that I showed or national donuts that I showed?
Yeah. Global donors you showed. The one scatter plot was there, where if you are meeting the demands of people, then we are overshooting towards the planetary boundary, the 9 parameters you were talking about.
I see what you mean. Well, this is the challenge. This is it. I mean, you've gone straight for the really tricky question, which I think is the question of our times. And which is why I think last century's economic theory doesn't serve us. I'm just going to try and bring that scatter plot back, actually, while we're here. Which one shall I bring back? Hang on. Oh, I think it's good to bring it back while we're talking, because this is what you're referring to. So, right,
Yeah.
you're talking about this. Are you saying that? I mean, what we're seeing here is that all countries, as they rise up and meet people's needs,
Yeah.
almost all countries, they are going straight past. They are going into ecological overshoot, right? So there's a few that are like Costa Rica, on a much lower income. So Costa Rica is on around $22,000 per year, which is about a quarter or a third of the United States. But the vast majority of high income countries today, that, or those that are above the line, like India, Italy, Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, Norway, right? They've got a blue inner circle. They are in massive ecological overshoot. So this is the conundrum, the dilemma of our times. And I sometimes say, you know, no country has ended human deprivation without economic growth, and no country has ever ended ecological degradation with it. You've put your finger on the dilemma. I'm not going to claim that I have a quick and easy answer. This is it. This is it. The way we have been interacting with the earth, and I don't think it's inevitable. I think it's the way we've been engaging, because we have been using Earth's resources in an incredibly degenerative way, as if we can just keep taking and throwing pollutants away again. If we reconnect to ecological cycles of the earth that take us back into regenerative material use, this would definitely enable us to find different ways to meet people's needs without overshooting planetary boundaries to that same degree. This is my personal view. I'm curious about your view, and I know there's plenty of engineers amongst you. So, and actually, I think the solutions to this
so
are
actually
largely engineering. Sorry, yeah, please go on.
So some countries are there which are mitigating the people demand, and also they're below the planetary boundary layer. So like these countries who are already overshooting, so if they adopt some like sustainable technologies and reuse, reduce, whatever, like there are some measures to do it, so will they be able to go back to that boundary layer, like to reduce that overshooting?
So can we come back within? Well, this is the big question, and the question you're asking, to me, it applies most to the reddest countries in the picture, right? So hello, United States, Canada, Australia. I mean, look at that. That is extraordinary, that scale of overshoot. Look at Sweden and Norway. People often say, oh, Sweden, Norway, these are, you know, the Nordic countries. People often assume these are the sustainable countries. Actually, they're in extreme overshoot because of their global, the draw on global resources. So for these countries, how do they come back within planetary boundaries? This is why I think there's no such thing as developed and developing countries anymore. Every nation here is in a very humble place because we don't know how to get to the direction we want to go in. It's a very uncharted path. Can I ask you, are you from your own studies, or if you're an engineer, what do you think, from in the context of India where you are, what looks like a feasible way that you could start to combine meeting people's needs but without overshooting or coming back within planetary boundaries?
Actually, we need to do the development, but we should keep in account that we do not degrade the lands more. Like you talked in one of the slides, that we should produce waste, but not much than that nature can accumulate it. So if we are using the sustainable and or the natural resources, we should not deplete them before they are able to replenish. So that's what we can do, and try to reduce the pollution so that the overall natural resources consumption should be reduced.
You sounding like a fantastic ecological economist.
Thank you so
yes,
much.
thank you. And I do want to say, although I'm talking from the realm of economics, and I think economics is very important in that it sets markets, it sets regulations, it sets prices, it shapes the economic landscape. I do think a lot of the solutions to what I'm showing are actually engineering, architecture. It lies with, it's the architects and the engineers who often actually say, we already know how to make these materials. We just need we need the economy to make these prices work. We know how to build regeneratively, but we need that to make sense economically. So the economists need to change the surroundings so that actually we can practice what engineering, what architects and designers often know already how to do.
Yeah, like you were talking about UHI, so there are some resilient materials which can be used to build the city so that they can mitigate the effect of UHI. Yeah.
Great.
So that's
Thank
we
you.
can do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comment? Let me see if there are any on the online.
And if anybody disagrees, I'm also very welcome that, or wants to question something. I'm very open to that.
There is a lot of thought already on nature-based solutions that we have. Even at Divecha, we have sustainable transport. We're looking at things differently. So we are there, but it's difficult, especially because there are still 80%, like my colleagues say, 70-80% of urban spaces in India is yet to come up. And we have learned lessons from the other worlds where they went wrong. But in order to take that step, that behavioral change itself will take a huge, a step. It's a huge risk also that developing countries will have to play. But keeping all that in mind, we know where we are to head, but it's just, I think the community, which needs to be very strong here as well, which we miss in any of the debates and any of the dialogues. When policies are being passed, we don't have community as the center, and we are re-looking at that as well in institutions, in our planning schemes, in our whether top-down or bottom-up approach. That's what we are doing. With that, anyone wants to say
Smriti, I'll
any
just add, since you mentioned
comments?
that, you said people say 80% of places in India have yet to be built and developed, and this is a real opportunity to do things differently, right? So some of the major cities in the world that already exist, it's going to be very hard to retrofit them, to remove the car dependency. It's hard to change the energy system once it's been, or change the water system. But as we build new places, and some people have said they want to use these frameworks in smaller cities, smaller towns of a million people, how can we now build new settlements that actually build in regenerative and distributive design from the beginning? So what can we do, making sure we don't lock ourselves into degenerative economic systems and designs? And I think it's a really important opportunity to take that up.
Yes. So, Raj, do you want to comment? Do you want to say anything? And with that, maybe, yes.
Just a couple of points.
Yes.
Now, thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. One thing I want, there is no point that we should disagree with you. We are 100% in agreement. But the slide which you are using, the last slide, which the girl, when she spoke, you opened. On the x-axis, if you see that if one parameter looks to me, which is close to that, is the carbon footprint generated by per capita, you can see. There is a vast difference in per capita. For example, Congo, Ethiopia, they are 0.17 ton per capita. And they are struggling for their food. So this is the dichotomy. Basically, if we say that now they should restrict to the development. Certainly, development in a sense, ecological sense, is all right. But we cannot restrict really the development because they are striving for their very basic needs. So, I was talking about this only. So the x-axis parameter, if you, very close to what you mean, what I could understand, is the per capita, is the maybe probably total carbon footprint of the country.
Yes, the carbon footprint is one aspect of it. It's the impact on all the 9 planetary boundaries, but the nation's carbon footprint is a part of it, of that ecological overshoot.
Yeah, but the carbon footprint per capita and the carbon footprint for the whole country, that is also really matters. Particularly if you see, India, it is less than 2 tons, but still, not talking about India. Say Ethiopia, it's less than 0.5 tons or so. Congo, another this thing, very less. They are really striving for their basic needs. So So therefore, I think incorporating certain philosophies, which on the one hand, where there is more of the carbon and the impact is high, there is the need to check first on priority. This is, I mean, my view. But thanks a lot. It is really, I'm very happy that it has opened vista for our I mean audience, and this new way to think, people who have not been thinking that. So it is very very thought provoking. Thank you very much. Now,
Thank you.
please stay. Thanks.
And I just want to pick up on this point you're making. So these very low income countries, by seeing it this way, it helps us see the real dilemmas that nations face and that the world faces. What direction should those countries move in? Who and what, you know, how I mean, I think they will increase their impact in the world. I think they will. Some of them may overshoot planetary boundaries and may need to do so as they move, as part of their movement towards living back within it. It may be a temporary overshoot. For me, this is all the more responsibility on the West, the part of the world I live in, to say this is why we must have a global responsibility to lead by reducing that overshoot faster, to make more space for other countries that have historically had a massive underuse of natural resources, and actually let them use their own natural resources rather than exporting them to the rest of the world. So this also comes back in on the question. I want to just bring it back in here. This is why we need a rebalancing. It's not saying those countries now have to act and use within their own resources. It's what is the rebalancing that's required in the world, the redistribution of wealth to make possible, the redistribution of carbon budgets to make possible that rise for those countries. So to me, this is exactly raising all the moral and ethical dilemmas. It's not an answer, it's a question that I think helps us see the world in a richer way than when we just merely talk about countries, nations, income per capita, and are they growing their GDP. This takes us much closer to the dilemmas between meeting the needs of people and living within the means of the planet, and how we need to put those metrics at the center of 21st century justice. Thank you for bringing that point.
Yeah. Okay, there's also a question. Yeah, I think there's a question in the chat box. If you could see that, I'll read it out. The question goes as to how should we understand the localization movement towards the donut economics?
How should we understand it? So it began because places wanted to do it. Cities and towns and communities wanted to do it. And so we created a general framework that can then be adapted by different places. So how the framework is being adapted in Ipoh, Malaysia, is using different indicators, different priorities, focusing on different issues from the way it's used in, say, Barcelona. The framework is very intentionally adaptable so that it can be useful in a place. And for me, it's a really important point that we've never tried to convince anybody to use it. All of the places where it's being used is because somebody there said this is a useful framework for our future. As with the Mumbai Doughnut Collab, they took the donut concept, they've adapted it to the most relevant metrics and issues of that city, and saying now we're going to use this as a tool here. So it's got built into it the adaptability to make it more relevant, to make it as relevant as it needs to be to specific places of the world. And every place that engages with it is doing it slightly differently, which means it creates a lot of inspiration for other places to see how they could do it. So we're just at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we are just following the flow of interest and the energy that's arising from people wanting to use it, and seeing where it's useful, which countries, regions it's most useful, and what kind of adaptations, and how can we support in making it more useful. And let me say again, it's one of among many possible ways in which we could reimagine the goal of the economy for the 21st century. It's one possible compass that sits alongside many others.
Yes, wonderful. If there are no questions, is it okay? Can we give a hand, a shout out and a thank you to Kate? You can just. So on behalf of the Vicha Center, Kate, and also on behalf of our chair, Professor S.K. Satish, I would thank you for the bottom of my heart for agreeing to be here on such short notice. And we would love to see you in India and at in our center, the Vicha Center, so you can interact with students, interact with town planners. We're doing a lot of work here. Yeah. So probably you could sit and also work on a way to build this economics just even around the campus in IISc in Indian Institute of Science. So with that, thank you so much, Kate, and we will be in touch.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to join you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.